Hi, my name is Karl. I go by Karlala with music stuff, and I run a sound system here in Brooklyn and the wider area, and I write music software. And I helped contribute some of the code to the drum machine, particularly around the sequencer and sample playback. As one part of a group of people that helped make the drum machine real. And Lita did a lot of the soldering and stuff out of my house here. We would meet up like once or twice a week in the thick of it to work on the drum machine. So that's me. My favorite part of the process is like whenever you would implement a new feature and then get to hear it for the first time. So we had these little bookshelf speakers, these like little computer speakers that we set up with the drum machine. And so we'd be working actually on this exact table, the same little school desk table. I had that in my living room, and that was our workbench. And so we would like try some stuff and then play it, and then we would like jam out for a while. And like that's my favorite part. Is like you actually like get the feature, and then like you kind of forget that you're building something, and you're just like playing with it, and then that's how you know it's a good feature. That and another favorite part of it was just like watching it come into being. Like I was just helping with like what I was specialized in, but then Lita would go. Let's say we were meeting up like once or twice a week. In the days in between, she'd be doing stuff like creating the PCB board, soldering stuff, and so she'd bring it back in, and it was like evolving every week, or there'd be some new thing that she'd done, or some new challenge that she found, and in some cases I could help. In some cases we were just like it was like a mystery, and she'd have to go somewhere else to help figure that out. So it was just really cool to see this like come into being. And honestly, it's a really niche thing to be making electronic instruments, and it's something that I've been doing in my life, but I haven't really had much community around it. So when I saw that this was what she was doing, that was definitely part of my interest of in working on it. Is like to actually work on this kind of thing with somebody else. Like I've typically been the only one around my social world that does this kind of thing. So that was just a joy. So yeah, I love being part of it. Like it feels cool to spend a day making a drum machine. Like
Yeah.
that's just cool. It's badass. And then Lita, you gotta love Lita. Like she's the best person. And then on top of that, all this terrible shit happened to her from NYU, and she was not being protected by the structures that are meant to protect students. She was facing all these repercussions that were total bullshit. And so you had like cool project, nicest person in the world. Something terrible happens to this person. Like, yeah, of course you're gonna like jump in and help. That was a simple equation, really. Yeah, I met Omar like over 10 years ago, and Lita was interested in having some like actual sounds in the drum machine. And Omar is a Palestinian, and so and a music producer. Like that's how I originally met him. Was like when he was going under a different name, Twin Primes, I believe, and he was like making techno. And so we met around a festival upstate that was like over 10 years ago. It had to be. If I had to guess, it was like 2013, 14, 15, in that range. Is when we met, and so it was a good match because he's been around. He's been doing like a series with another really close collaborator of mine, Alicia, and they do like a sort of ambient kind of series, but with big sound system. So I had done the sound for them before, and so Omar was back in community with me. Um, so it makes sense as a connection. Now, that said, I don't know if I actually am the one who connected them directly, but if I am, I'll take credit for that. But for the DIY stuff, it's like we're not organized by a higher power. I'd say there is some outsourcing, like like to make a circuit board. It makes sense to order that circuit board. Or with my speakers that I build, I put components in that are built by some company because I feel like DIY is about like leveraging what you can do and what you can have control over. But it's a balancing act where it's like you 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 want to do something, create something, and then there's cases where it makes sense to use some off the shelf solution, and then there's cases where it makes sense to like fully do it yourself. And I guess that's a balancing act for everybody. Like you could make a CDJ. Probably someone should make an open source CDJ. It probably even exists, or just write firmware for the existing hardware. But the DJs are using pre-existing CDJs because that's a big project, and you want that device to be compatible between everybody. So maybe that's not the place to do it. But something like a drum machine or a musical instrument, that's more personal. That's you don't have to have the same drum machine as everybody else. In fact, you probably don't want the same drum machine as everybody else because that's what's going to make your sound. So yeah, there's like a lot of reasons to go DIY on that. And then also some stuff that I heard Lita writing about, speaking about with this project is stuff that I really resonated with. Is that maybe it's just a matter of like realizing that you do have the power to. Oh, here she is. Look at that, sneaking up on us. I was just talking about you. Okay. So weird.
You summoned me.
Yeah. But some of the stuff that she was writing about and speaking about early on, I really resonated with, which was sort of taking the power over the machines that we use and determining what those should be like on a more personal level, on a more local level. And I really resonate with that. That's how I initially got into this stuff, was sort of a combination of being really broke and starting to realize what was possible with software. My initial foray into building instruments was wanting to build the instruments that I couldn't afford to buy, and then very quickly that turned into building instruments that could do things that other instruments couldn't even do. And you could just decide to make a sampler that worked a certain way or a sequencer that worked a certain way, and that became a whole creative world of itself. And I really see drum machines, commercial drum machines, the DIY stuff, everything. I see synthesizers and drum machines and music gear as their own creative world. In addition to the music that gets made with them, I see the synthesizers as also a creative realm, because this stuff has really only existed like, maybe 100 years. Like with the initial experiments with electronically generated sound. I know some people credit the Italian futurists. You don't want to celebrate those guys too much. I think there's some origins of fascism there too. But some of the first synthesized sounds are really just like 100 years ago, ish. So this realm has like not very well established. It's not been very well established until recently. Like every synthesizer that's come out since the origin of synthesizers has been different than every other synthesizer, and it's only in the last maybe couple decades that people started to like reissue synthesizers. And that means we're getting to a mature place, but where we actually have figured out what we want it to be. But for the majority of the time of synthesizers, they've constantly been being reinvented. That's true about DJ mixers too. Like it took a long time for us to settle on what we wanted that to actually be. Whereas like a guitar, maybe in like the 50s or 60s, we settled on what a guitar was. And there've been guitars that have been made basically the same since then. But a synthesizers, it's been really rapidly evolving. So I find that to be a very interesting creative world, just to follow the history of them, like how different things were in the 70s versus the 80s versus the 90s versus the 2000s, and now we're kind of wrapping around again and doing reissues and all that stuff. So I started the sound system, and that led to me like really rapidly meeting a lot of people in the, let's call it the Bushwick DJ community. It's not, I hesitate to call it the dance music scene of New York because it's just a small part of the dance music scene in New York, but all the people around Myrtle Ave, the clubs around Myrtle, and then nowadays and whatever other clubs. But I met a bunch of those people real rapidly once I had a sound system going, and somebody was going to play at Mood Ring and wanted to tune up the sound system before their night. Now their night was on Saturday night, and we got access to Mood Ring on a Wednesday or Thursday. So we went in there before the weekend and we did some tuning, but to do that, they didn't have any like processor equipment at the time. So I took a graphic EQ that I had and I installed it kind of without asking permission. Like that came about later, but I installed it at Mood Ring, and we tuned the room, but we left it there because there was parties like on Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, and so we ended up leaving that thing in Mood Ring because it was an improvement. And I guess word got around for that. I got a lot of feedback from that, where I think that was where a lot of people heard about my project and my work for the first time, was this sort of like, renegade tuning of the club that everybody uses, but sounded harsh. So I don't want to talk down on Mood Ring. Like, it's a really important place, but that was like a moment there where I got the got to be known a little. Some of my first moves. Over this winter, I was doing a lot of coding on my own, and I'm really interested in maps. I really like what computers can do with maps. I think like one of the coolest pieces of software is like Google Earth, or there's the one I don't know what it's called, but the one that lets you see all the stars. You just point your phone and like see the stars. And I'm really interested in map projections too, because it's necessary to unwrap the globe. You could think of it like peeling an orange. You have to make some kind of compromise if you're going to unwrap that onto a 2D surface. And so necessarily there's going to be distortion in any 2D map. And the map that they put in most schools, at least when I was growing up, that was in most schools, is problematic because the distortion happens towards the edges, because you kind of think like you got the globe and you peel the back of it and you got to stretch it to be a rectangle. And so what that does is it ends up stretching the top of the map and the bottom of the map, so that Antarctica and everything further away from the equator gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So Antarctica looks huge, Greenland looks huge, the U.S. looks bigger than it should, and then Africa and South America, like along the equatorial line, get shrunk. And so that leads people to believe that like the U.S. is close to the same size as Africa, which is not. It's about 1/3 the size. And so I was interested in that distortion because you can't escape some amount of distortion in this process. But so I wrote an app to let me position the globe on any center point and then apply the same distortion. So right now it's like you got the center point is the equator somewhere between South America and Africa, and you peel it from there. So like that stuff's shrunk the most. But I made it so you could spin the globe first and then say, okay, do it there, and it would unpeel. And so you could just see how ridiculous the distortion was. And you could also go looking for new maps. Like there's definitely a better, more accurate map you can get by looking from the top, where you see all the continents that people live on, other than Antarctica, kind of more accurately sized. And I realized if you look at the UN logo, the United Nations logo, they have a map that's very similar to that in the center. So they're looking from the top. And so you see the whole planet kind of wrapped around, with like Africa going off one way, South America going off another, US off another, Asia off another. And that's more accurate in a way. So I was just playing with that, and I had made that. I put it up online, made it into a kind of a toy, so you could just spin the globe and you'd see the distortion happening. And like that was enough for me. I was like, okay, that's cool, and moved on from there. And then when Lita was talking about wanting to bring in sounds from the whole global south, we at some point I was like, wait, I have this map code that I could translate into this project, and so I kind of already had it running. I was able just to port it over, and then made it so that when you load up, like we've got GPS coordinates attached to the drum kits, and so and then a label for each location. And so whenever you switch a drum kit, you can switch the globe will like rotate to that GPS coordinate, center it, and show the label. So that's what's going on in the drum machine right now.